Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, or good day, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to the next episode of No Dice, No Glory. Sponsored by our jobs that actually pay us money, we're coming to you not at all live from an abandoned arms factory deep under a mountain in West Virginia. We are proud to proffer to you the finest in wargaming coverage. Without any further ado, let's get this show on the road.
Thank you, Sean, for that once again rousing introduction. It's funny. A couple of weeks ago, Sean's like, we need to catch up, and that would actually be 3 weeks ago, and we've yet to catch up. So we're going to catch up next show. I'll tell you all about it, even if he says don't tell anybody. So there's usually with folks I know personally, I've hung out with. A lot of them say, "Well, why don't you have us on the show?" And I usually just give the standard. You're not really all that interesting. But a lot of it is because we've seen each other, we've hung out, there's inside jokes nobody gets. But these two guys came to me, they said, this is the only podcast we're doing in small markets. So I know that they're going to, hopefully do others. But it's two guys I've met a couple of years ago. I think the world of them. I know you will too. But they're here to talk about Combat Commander Vietnam. Did I screw up that name 3 times? Combat Commander Vietnam. So I'm going to introduce Steve Rangazas and NB to the show, man. Thank you guys so much.
Of course, man.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here.
Is it?
Yeah.
It will be. Don't worry. We'll get there.
You sure?
Yeah.
Watch. All right. Let's watch. And, we always carry an E rating. So, I'm going to hit you guys off with the first question. First question. Both you guys have to answer, but not together. What was the game that you played? And what age were you that you said, I'm going to be a lifelong war gamer?
Ooh. I don't give away my age, though.
You just have to say what age you were when that happened.
I think it was 16. And
what
I think it
name?
was this. I was standing in a Books A Million in Muncie, Indiana, and I was looking at a strategy and tactics magazine, flipping through it. And so the first war game I ever bought, I'm ashamed to say, was a decision war game called Caesar Rome versus Gaul, one of those folio ones. And I'd like to think that my tastes have improved since then.
So if it was decision, it would have to be like Ty Bomba or
Ty Joe Bomba. Miranda.
Miranda, yeah. MB, what about you? What got you hooked? What was your gateway drug?
I'm gonna say that it happened much later for me. I've been a gamer forever, but it wasn't until I was like, this is the space that I need to be in more. And it was Chad Jensen. Like, there's no doubt about it. It was Chad Jensen, and it was Combat Commander that did it to me.
All the times we've spoken, I never knew you were a fan of the series.
Oh yeah, big fan. And I mean, I think I'm just a big fan of Jensen overall. And it wasn't my first Chad game, but like, it was the one that made me like just blew my mind, and I was like, okay, there's something here. There's something even more than what I've done before,
Probably was Combat Commander Europe.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep, which I came into that game later. Mm-hmm. My first one was, I don't know if you guys know this, but I have this real thing for the Great War. Mm-hmm. You may have heard. Mm-hmm. So it was Great War Commander.
Okay.
And especially with card games, most war gamers go, I hate that, which I don't know, not my kind of people. So I went to a Combat Commander Con that we have here, which I think you guys should come to and demo the game sometime. You could crash that at my house. I can't promise you'll live. So started playing the others, bought them all, huge fan of the series. What about, and this is really for both of you guys, we're looking at Combat Commander Vietnam. What really kind of drew you to this series? What were the interesting mechanics that you guys said, we got to do another game?
I think like the interesting thing about like Combat Commander overall, like, is it's just a insane level of detail that is taken away from the players so that they can sort of play pretty like just straightforward. And so as a system, it breaks all the mold in terms of like, how do you actually play a war game. It's fast paced, but it's also intense. It can capture all of these little dynamics, and the reason that it works is just like it's just all of these individual layers of design that are pulled together to be able to make this system that just like does something that I don't think many other games are able to accomplish. And so when I don't think the truth of the matter is that we weren't even planning on doing Combat Commander Vietnam. It just sort of happened to be the first step, so to speak. Um, and so, but I think the overall impetus, like I don't know, Stephen will talk a little bit in terms of just like what it is that draws him to Vietnam specifically, and then how CC sort of fits into that picture. Um, but it's definitely just as a design system itself, one of those worth studying for the types of things that we're trying to do. Like, and so having the opportunity to sort of take that work and then say, okay, let's think about how it applies to Vietnam has just been a great time.
Yeah, I would say my answer is a little simpler than that, which is the random scenario generator is why.
Yeah.
Because I was basically pivoting in my wargaming career from doing these multi-packs where I do these tons of different conflicts to this a series
You
of
could take a
designs on
victory
Vietnam
lap.
that explores.
You could take a victory lap and tell us what games those were.
Well, I don't know if they'll ever be in print or come out given the current state of things, but the first game, The British Way, is this multi-pack about British counterinsurgency that came out in 2023 that is up for reprint and has an expansion up on P500. And 4 games in one box that are all pretty different. And then using the coin system, GMT's coin system, and then the follow-up, the Guerrilla Generation, is about 4 conflicts in Cold War Latin America that is going through art right now and is tentatively going to go to the printer in this summer. But we'll have to see what happens. But long story short, I was doing that for a long time with GMT, but I really wanted to pivot towards this idea of doing the Vietnam War, but at different scales. So leveraging this um, immense amount of data that we have on the Vietnam War, particularly from both sides, at all the at the strategic level, the operational level, and the tactical level. And I didn't really have a good idea of what I was going to do on the tactical level until NB came to me and was like, "Hey, Gene asked whether you would be interested in doing Combat Commander Vietnam with me." And I was like, well, that kind of solves the problem because to me, the why RSG is so important is that I wanted a Vietnam tactical game that can cover all the different participants in Indochina between particularly 1961 and 1975, but also even potentially 1945 to 1975. And I think a great example of this is from Combat Commander Europe is that I bought Combat Commander Europe for the Yugoslav partisans because I'm this guy who's really interested in counterinsurgency. I imagine a lot of gamers, that was not their top priority when they bought Combat Commander Europe. But like I wanted a system where even if you've never heard about Hmong tribesmen fighting in Upper Laos, some people may have, and they're going to have scenarios about them, even though, I'm imagining most people want to play as the U.S. Marines or the U.S. Army.
I don't know why. We know how that turned out.
Mhm.
Well, yeah.
Play to see what happens.
Yeah, that's right. It's a fascinating conflict, and it's interesting. The social impact of Vietnam. I mean, I still think we feel that today, but this is not one of those podcasts. But Vietnam, I have a bunch of tactical level games because I think that's the only way to play that war, because it essentially was a company commander's war. And looking at some game systems I like 65 by Flying Pig, I have, and I interviewed Joe for Front Towards Enemy, and it's like one of those things where even if I didn't know you guys, and I would feel guilty for not buying it, I'm still interested enough in that war, and I like the Combat Commander series where it's a must buy. So you say something interesting here that most people don't realize that, as soon as World War II ended, Indochina started. And you can almost say it really went on till almost 79 in one way or another, with some brief lulls in there. As you guys were looking at the game, was there a particular area that you really, or period, that you guys wanted to cover?
I would say first off, we really wanted to cover 61 to 75, and that is what the base game covers, with the caveat that it also covers the civil wars in Laos and Cambodia.
Mm-hmm.
Because I would say that one thing that's maybe different from using Chad's ingenious RSG, that's a little bit different from our approach from those two other games you mentioned,
Yep.
is this idea that we as much want to make this about the other perspectives of other combatants' perspectives, not just the American perspective. And so one thing that you get from one way of doing that, of course, is including these adjacent conflicts that are very much related. So North Vietnamese troops are fighting in Laos and in Cambodia, and then of course we do these incursions into Cambodia. They're just very interlocked together. So they thought that was the perfect fit to include those theaters, so to speak, in a tactical game. On the other hand, like when you read, which I've been doing right now at Harvard, translated Vietnamese histories of the war, they see the thing as one continuous fight from 45 to 75.
Yeah.
And that kind of approach has really made us seriously consider this idea of doing and even kind of made a preliminary plan of how to do a 45 to 54 expansion for the current base game, which only covers 61 to 75.
One of my favorite books, because I know, first of all, people realize we've all read the same books. One was Paven, just about the
Mhm.
People's Army. But one of the most interesting books, and I think I had it assigned to me to read, um, was A Street Without Joy.
Mhm.
And it really kind of looks at the problems. Everybody thinks Dien Bien Phu and that's it. But you look at everything leading up to that, it's a fascinating conflict. Um, I personally would like to see those that earlier period because I think it's interesting. And we play war games for fun, but we should also learn something from them. One is how to cheat. Um, the the other one is like, I if I am reading a book on a particular topic, I'm going to probably buy a game on it. And if I buy a game on a particular topic, I'm probably going to buy a book on it. And I think
Yeah.
a lot of us feel the same way. So, taking the system, and I know you guys sent me the major rules changes. So, as a Combat Commander fan, I'm going to what is changing in this that will be a new rule for me, and a lot like Great War Commander, changed some of the core rules, but still kept its DNA from Chad. What are some things that you guys are putting in there?
So I think like the biggest change is really just the overall framing. A lot of times when you're playing a CCE scenario or even CCP scenario, what you'll get is these battles that can sort of just draw out or until like almost to the last man, right? You can just sort of play depending upon how the victory is sort of set up, and that can go for a long time. And one of the things that we were thinking about as we started off was that the time frame of the actual engagements in Vietnam were just so much faster. And there was a lot more that was happening in that. So, like, the first thing that one would notice as they look at the sort of dashboard display for what we have for CCV is that it stops at turn 8 and there's nothing that goes past turn 8. And then on top of that, we've sort of modified the way, as opposed to there being the surrender levels, by introducing this concept called break contact. And what break contact is really about is the fact that the shortness of time is because at the scale that CC operates, either it was going to become a much bigger affair or it was going to completely dissipate within that time frame. And so you're playing for these engagements at the scale that they are, the moment of contact until the moment of breaking contact, however that break contact is going to happen. And so that ends up being one capped off at being at the end of 8 turns. Somebody's got it's going to be a break contact overall, but there's also this dynamic of you as a player having the choice of whether or not you are going to be the one to break contact to sort of bring the scenario to an end at an earlier time. And I think that is just gets the players who are familiar with CC into a completely different sort of mindset around what it means turn to turn and the choices that you have. And there's a lot of other smaller mechanics that we've changed to sort of match what's happening both at the scale and for the conflict. But that framing is like overarching the whole experience as you go into Combat Commander Vietnam.
That's interesting. I didn't catch that from the notes you gave me about the rules. So I'll bring this up, and I think this will go deeper in it. If I was to look at the firefights of Vietnam or even the major battles, and I were to ask the commanders of each, what is your theory of victory? I would get two incongruent and asymmetric answers. I want to engage the Americans. I want to pose cost and position, and I want to retain strength to fight tomorrow, where the Americans would be almost total annihilation. How does the game work with that? And is that what kind of led to the big difference you just explained?
You want to take
Yeah,
that, Steve?
so I think that when we're talking about individual level commanders, we wanted to have a little bit more variety in whether they're always thinking that way you're describing. Because, for instance, we only have secret objectives now, on top of the usual ones where there are like kind of public terrain control objectives and also your classic attrition objectives. But we have hidden objectives that are based off of kind of three suits, so to speak. One is inflicting attrition of various sorts, like kill leaders, things like that. One is about breaking contact, either staying a long time or breaking contact as soon as possible. And the third is basically just additional victory points for terrain objectives like you had in CC Europe. And the reason why we wanted that variety is that, yes, the communists, for instance, the NLF or the PAVN, want to often inflict heavy losses on the Americans, for instance, when they're trying to overrun a special forces base on the border to open up their infiltration routes. But at the same time, you also have to be able to generate scenarios where the Americans have made contact with them and they want to leave as soon as possible, or at least they want to inflict some losses, and then before the American firepower can show up, they want to leave. And so, and the same can be true of the Americans and the South Vietnamese. And so you kind of know that there are these three broad objectives, but you don't exactly know what your opponent's specifically got in any given engagement. And that part of the game is actually now sussing out, all right, what is my opponent actually trying to do here? And I'll say, though, that the big, kind of your point of total annihilation versus let's try to inflict some losses and preserve my forces and get away on the communist side, is that one of the big differences between asymmetries, I should say, in the order of battles is that the Americans, as you would probably guess, have tons of fire support. And there's a whole new fire support system, including different types of fire support ranging from artillery to gunships to airstrikes. And they don't have as much organic firepower. So army company would often go out into the field without even any mortars with them, just M60s, which are, from combat commander's perspective, light machine guns, with the hope that they're only going to ever search out in artillery range, though. Because if you have all that fire support, you might as well just call that in rather than carrying heavy organic firepower with you through the jungle. Whereas the communists have much worse firepower that you can call in through the fire support system, but often they did take the trouble of actually carrying or fighting from defended positions. They have more medium heavy machine guns. There are mortars on the map with them. And I think that that'll be a really actually jarring lesson for a lot of particularly American players, is that the NBA with their AK-47s and their RPDs embedded into every squad actually have a higher organic firepower rating on their counters than the American units once they were deployed with the M16s and their M60 separate counters. And it really shows that the Americans were closing that gap with fire support, not their kind of organic, let's say, small arms fire.
So they have to fight doctrinally.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, somebody's going to have to read some doctrine here. You know what they say about Americans, they write great doctrine. Unfortunately, they never follow it. So, yeah, I find that interesting because, you know, when you look at the average rifle company, whether it's Marine, Air Mobile, or Army Infantry, it was all about making contact and then calling in air and artillery, where, you know, the NVA or the VC, and they fought totally different, that they had to bring it with them to suppress. And, you know, it's interesting that you put that in the counters. You're right. People will be surprised. Why are my American forces so weak? But you make up for that with the amount of on-call firepower that they may be able to have available to them.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And where you really see that, especially, and we have some very depressing / amusing quotes about this from South Vietnamese officers, is that for most of the American war in Vietnam, the South Vietnamese are still, and so are the special forces trained civilian irregular defense group. They're using World War II weapons.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so you can actually see like a crossover point in the unit values of CC Europe and CC Vietnam, because there's still forces on the map that are pretty much using the exact kit that you had in CC Europe. And they're having to go up against NVA units, again, with this like incredibly concentrated amount of organic firepower within a company. And you can see why. I think it does illustrate a little bit why, before the ARVN modernized in the late 60s and early 70s, why they were having so much trouble against a slightly smaller, even comparable sized communist force.
That was at war since 1947, 48.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, I find it interesting. So one of the other things about the conflict, and I think Captain Willard talks about it in Apocalypse Now, which, you know, we've all seen it, even the long one. Like, what is going home for the NVA or VC? It's victory, where you had a draftee army that the United States sent to that war. That, you know, once again with the draftee army, you take the good with the bad. How is that played in the game?
Mm.
The will to fight.
So there's a couple different ways that comes through the game. So one is that, particularly with the American and other foreign military OBs, there's mixes in the counter quality. So in Europe, like when you're deploying CC Europe or in World War II, where we're talking about whole units being rotated, it makes sense for like to have a whole unit of line units. Whereas in the OBs in Vietnam, you're going to have a mix of quality, because obviously you have the 1-year rotation and these both draftees and better trained early on volunteers mixing into the same unit. And so there's a lot of more OBs where you deploy them, like from the random scenario generator OB tables, and you'll see that, oh, well, I have 3 elite units, 3 army units, and 3 green units in the same army company. And then it becomes a position of like, well, I know this squad's a little bit less experienced than this one. I have to work around that. A more organizational level way of modeling that is that one of the big mechanical changes we also have in the game are what are called deck shifts. So you have in Combat Commander, for the listeners who have not played, you have these fate decks that are how you resolve your orders and actions. And these decks are kind of distributed in terms of orders to reflect the kind of national or organizational characteristics of the different sides. And so CC Vietnam comes with 6 decks. US, South Vietnamese, Free World Allies, Special Forces, NVA, and then NLF, Insurgents. And what the deck shifts do is they shift the distribution of orders slightly under given conditions to reflect either organizational or changes over the course of the conflict. So a good example of that is the NLF and the Special Forces after 1969 the base of population that they were drawing from with their recruitment was getting increasingly exhausted to the point where they're having to draft teenagers or even 14, 15-year-olds, and they're really scraping the bottom of the barrel, and that hurts or at least changes their order composition. Whereas, for instance, with the US deck, there's actually a deck shift for when you're playing Marine OBs versus Army OBs. And for the Free World Allies, when you're playing as, let's say, Thai or South Koreans, it's like sort of the base deck. But you actually have order changes for when you're playing as the Anzac forces. In part because the Anzac forces were actually an all-volunteer military. And so they were a little bit better trained at times, or had more, let's say, quality consistency among them than, for instance, the late 1960s draft-based U.S. Army.
And I hate to quote another movie, but you guys seen the movie Long Tan out there? If you haven't, you need to see it because it's a great movie. And they're in the halls of the Pentagon, which NBU came with me. We went down the Anzac corridor, and there's that picture there of the indigenous Australian. His name is Buddy Lee, and I always tell people that from Long Tan, and they go, "Wait, Buddy Lee was the jeans guy," and I'm like, "Yeah, just go with that. Just go with that." Sorry, I cut you off, sir.
No, I was just gonna bring up, like you mentioned before, in terms of like the earlier period of the war, and then Stephen was earlier talking about just being able to talk about how the units themselves were using weapons from World War II. And I think that's one of the beauties of what made this sort of come together, was just like realizing that when you break down what was happening in the CCE system, there is a continuation that can be there. That's not just let's sort of rebuild it, but actually make it that line that connects that dot from, okay, this is how you go from World War II to Vietnam. We sort of in the base game are just sort of taking that latter period, but there is all this room to fill in that what's happening in terms of conflict between the end of World War II and the start of where CCV starts, which is like 1961. And so that is really only facilitated because of the way that Chad put in the work for developing the base system to be able to accommodate how all of these units changed over time, or how basically warfare changed over time at this tactical level, and being able to represent that across whatever the conflict is in that period by drawing those lines. So I think that's one of the things that was really exciting. Like Steven said, when it was approached to us, it was like, okay, this isn't necessarily what we were thinking about, but we've been playing the game. We've been talking a lot about Vietnam for other reasons, and being able to draw that line together directly really facilitated being able to say, okay, what does this system need to become to be able to like actually capture what it means to be doing Vietnam?
Yeah, great point, because it's nobody ever designs an original war game. We take it from every single game we've played, whether or not we liked it or not. But Chad Jensen kind of put a canvas out there that really, from playing CCE, and I like playing the Brits, that playing the Brits, they play like that. And I would say out of all the versions of World War II, I like the Pacific the most because it adds a little bit to it. It's a little bit different of a game, but it captures that fighting so well that once again, that's why we're all fans. So I'll bring up one thing that I hear from a lot of war gamers, and this is a repeat. So I know you guys don't listen, but a lot of war gamers, wait, it's card based. Now I want to do what I want to do when I want to do it, because damn it, I'm the general, and that. How do you guys overcome that? I just tell them to shut up. Life doesn't work like that, but you guys have to be so much nicer because you're selling a game.
I mean, I think that's like the understatement, or what's like it's overstated too much for Combat Commander because of the way that folk are stuck in the way that they perceive how war games should flow. And the I go, you go sort of system is really a matter of static. Let me think about what's supposed to represent X number of time for as long as I possibly want to get the right positioning and do all of these things. Whereas war is much more of okay, what's happening right now? What's happening right now? What's happening right now? What can I do right now? And when you break down, particularly when you start breaking down all of the elements of the combat commander system, you start with the cards where Stephen was just talking about. Each faction has their own composition of cards. It's not just like a general assortment that everybody gets the same thing, but those compositions are meant to reflect what each of those factions sort of had as their capabilities, which is layered on top of the orders of battle, which are the base of the whole system. And it's the base of the RSG, which was what birthed the system. And then from that, you add on the cards as the ability to be able to act from those. And I think a lot of times what happens for players that aren't used to this is they want to ponder over the cards for every single hand. And I think a key to playing Combat Commander is just knowing you've got to discard your hand. You've got to discard a lot. And Stephen will laugh at me because I'm always the worst about this. I'm just like, just discard the whole hand. But like, you really are trying to move through the cards and build up a hand as opposed to ponder, well, what's the most that I can do with this hand that I have? And so being able to take that risk of, I'm going to discard the hand that I have or discard this number of cards to be able to build the ability that I want, that's the strategic thinking that's happening in an IGO-UGO system when you're looking at each of the individual stacks, where you're, instead of thinking about each individual stack and sort of planning how you're going to do that, you're saying, okay, this is what I've got on the board. This is what I would like to do. I've got an odds of drawing 2 more cards that'll give me exactly what I need to be able to execute this one sort of maneuver that's going to take this objective or kill these units or whatever it's going to be. You have to build that level and then keep flowing through it. And when you get to the level of play where you're just doing that and it's just flowing, the game moves so quickly and so much happens in a way that what you can do, all of those things that you're wanting to do, you end up being able to at least try them. Not always going to guarantee that you can make them happen, but you can get to the point of actually trying them and seeing if they are effective. And the fact of the matter is that when you're doing that, you actually do see a reflection of what it meant to be a combat commander or a company commander trying to manage the forces in these types of engagements at this scale.
Yeah, I would just my response is a little bit less elegant than that. I usually just tell people that, well, if you actually read memoirs, which I did a lot of for this project, of soldiers in Vietnam from whichever side you want to pick, whichever military you want to pick, there's just a lot of chaos on party battlefields in general, but also particularly on Vietnam battlefields, where it's just very hard to explain why certain things happen. And like a good example of that is that one of the things we were trying to figure out with this game is like basically we would always appeal to this question of, okay, at the combat commander scale, does this mechanic actually make sense? And so there was a while, for instance, where there's actually no airstriking or napalming in the game because it just takes a lot of these engagements were over before you would have a plane actually arrive, even with jets.
Stephen had to
Vietnam.
go and get the charts to figure out what the response time was across the
So I had to
board.
go get the response times and everything, and there's a pretty big range between, like, if you divert an in-flight. I don't know why I'm explaining this to Mitch Reed, but for the listeners,
Because I'm an idiot. Yeah, I look. Anytime I can hear somebody explain how air power works, I'm all ears. I may learn something, but I just thought you just wanted to blame the Air Force. There's a lot you can blame us on, but go ahead. Yeah, I mean we the thing about air power, especially in Vietnam, and once again, let me pontificate, is that people thought it was always there, ready and available, and I think movies have portrayed that, right? Where once I hate talking about movies and Mel Gibson movies at that, but you look at when he calls the broken arrow in the middle of that movie, and also all that air came in. All that air was up supporting that operation.
mm-hmm.
Had that have just been, we're just going to land here, or we're just patrolling, that would not have been available. So all of that was sort of packaged and on call. And especially when you're close in fighting, the last thing you want to do is frag your own troops. I think that's a myth that people think about the war. Yes, we tended to engage the enemy close to our artillery fire bases. Got it. But eventually they got to slow down. But air, it's you know, it wasn't like it was in the movies. Is that what you're going to say? Or you just
Yeah.
say effing Air Force?
Well, I mean, you'll see these statistics, and I know that this was actually a controversial statistic that the data analysts in the Pentagon calculated that the Air Force was not particularly happy about during the war. The systems analysis boys, that
Yeah.
only about 10% of airstrikes in 1967 were devoted to close combat.
Yep.
Like the majority were interdiction bombing or bombing over North Vietnam or bombing of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and that the vast majority, and like gunships were a little higher, like maybe like 40% of gunship sorties were to troops in contact, but the majority of this fire support that troops were using was the much quicker mortars and artillery fire. And
Right.
you can wait for an airstrike, but one of the nice things about not being able to do exactly what you want to do always with the fate decks is that sometimes you have to, with our new system, every faction, I should say, has a radio card where you have preceded secretly what you're trying to call in. And depending on what the different type of fire support is, the more prep it takes to do. And that models things like you have to get a forward air controller overhead and things like that. And so like an airstrike takes like 4 prep, and then your 5th card can actually do the fire for effect. And depending on how the deck shuffles, that could take what would be in game time like 10 minutes, or it could take 40 minutes, and the scenario is almost over, and you still haven't gotten your airstrike yet. And that's something that the Fate deck can do.
I think there's
In
guys
combat.
still waiting
Yeah.
for their 9-liner to get answered. So sorry. Go ahead, Steve. Sorry.
Well, this is just something that I would say to that cranky wargamer who's like, why can't I do everything I can do in ASL? The answer, the answer would be because it actually lets you kind of elegantly include some things that you otherwise couldn't.
Yeah, I think that's like the fire support is another one of the major sort of not major, but like it is a pretty big change because it's like the radio play in CCE and Mediterranean is a little bit different than what it is that we wanted to model, and so you're not, there's no breaking of radios, but the player has to really plan. And I don't know, we played a game recently where I was just holding on to fire support, but just could not actually find a target. And so that combination of having it but not being able to use it, or
You,
not
you can
having
get,
it.
you can get a pill for that. Helps you find the target. Sorry. Yeah. Come on,
Oh,
you guys know I was going to bring this stuff up, but well, but here's what you just explained. Probably a lot of commanders in Vietnam would say is 100% dead on accurate.
yeah, I think that's one of the things that we were trying to go for, is just like making sure that we respected the scale. And I think that's one of the things that really understanding about the combat commander system is really understanding what that scale is. So what I think what Stephen was alluding to before is that for a while we were like, yeah, we're just not going to bring that in. We're not going to have the air support because at the scale, the odds of it happening are much lower than what players may want. But in reality, you just weren't going to be able to call that in. But we were able to find, through the shift in the fire support mechanic, a way to bring it in a way that's more realistic for the scale.
Had I been asked, I would have said, "Don't even put it in."
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of that is really like, well, why not? And I'm like, because it's not an easy thing to do, and it wasn't as abundant as people think it was.
Yeah.
So, I think there's enough fire mechanics in the game,
Yeah.
and I can count the times on one hand that an airstrike actually came in CCE or CCP
Mm-hmm.
that actually turned the game. And
Yeah.
of course, if you're going to use Vietnam, you have to increase the lethality.
Mm-hmm.
Napalm's some pretty wild stuff. But it really was used where there was no U.S. troops around.
Yeah.
And it's trying to avoid those problems. And I think a lot of, especially when we market games and have people play, it's like, well, this isn't realistic. And I'm like, well, were you there? Unfortunately, with Vietnam, we can actually talk to folks that were there. Have
Mhm.
you tried to speak to anybody that was in Vietnam that can kind of check your notes because the research, the first person accounts, you know, I don't know if you knew this, but at Carlisle Barracks, you can get a lot of good stuff out of there. It's a joke. You see, that's
Yeah.
the inside joke nobody's going to get.
Yeah.
We
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say one of the as we were showing it off to like for the first time at GMT, um Tony was there, and Tony was really grilling us on the artillery and making sure that we were getting the understood what needed to be represented in the artillery mechanics. And I think we've had some other sort of like encounters like that where it's just sort of like making sure that is this the thing that's being represented, and then of course like all of the um, primary research that Stephen has been able to capture is just like really making sure that we are capturing what is the what would be representative of what was there and what was at the scale.
Yeah, and that's the interesting thing. I don't recall. I know in Great War Commander they said, well, the units are bigger, they're platoons, not squads, but a game like that, I think putting in a time and distance scale, it's people are really hung up on it. It's almost superfluous. Well,
Mhm.
what battle took place in 8 turns? I don't know. You know, the thing is, it's these engagements are really sharp. They're quick, and it's interesting. And I really want to get back to this. So, playing, the game that Rex Brennan and team put out, Nineveh, They Are Coming, which before the game you pick your victory objectives, and I don't know if you guys have played it. It's a
Mhm.
pretty decent game,
Mhm.
and I like the secret objectives in Combat Commander system, but it seems like you guys have kind of put that on some steroids. And I know
Yeah,
you covered it before, but I want to talk about it a little bit more.
well, I think actually where it really starts getting interesting is that one of the big things that we're adding to the base game for Vietnam is this campaign system. And so you end up with campaign objectives, which are for the full battalion, whereas for the individual engagements, you have engagement objectives, and those can be conflicting even at times. And so, but they're both hidden between the players. And so there's this idea that you have to really figure out what the enemy is trying to do while also trying to do what it is that you need to do to achieve your objectives. And the tension there is just there from the get-go, from the setup. Even you're starting to think it through like, okay, what is it that they're trying to do based off of whatever they're setting up. And like I said, the connection between that on the engagement and then taking that back to well, what's going on at the campaign is just an amazing sort of little tension.
It's a game within the game.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait. Well, if you need play testers, um, I'll get my wife right on it. No, I mean, I dig the series. I and knowing you guys, I knew there was going to be something special with this. I plunked down my money right away, even once I saw it. And I'm not trying to say somebody mentioned it to me because one of you guys mentioned it and said if you tell the other guy, I'll be pissed. So I'm not going to say that happened. I don't recall that happening, but it is looking at that war and what is different. So looking at, you have the random scenario generator, which I think really, if anybody's on the edge of buying any part of this series, get the RSG. But you will, like the other games, I'm sure, base it on real battles and campaigns. What are some of the ones that we can see um, in that first game?
Okay, so just to help give a little bit of history to the listener too. So when Europe first came out, the original game that made all of this happen, Chad actually designed Europe and Mediterranean, each of which came with 3 decks and 12 scenarios each, like 12 maps, as 2 separate boxes because GMT made him do so for production reasons. But he had designed all of that together. Like Europe, what we were calling here Europe, which is really 2 boxes put together, and now GMT for the first time are combining those. And they will only ever be sold from this point on as one big combined box. Vietnam is one big combined box. So rather than GMT forcing us to split it into 2 boxes, this is part of the reason why Vietnam costs so much. So if any of your listeners go to the P500 page and are shocked by the price, that's the pre-tariff price, just to be clear. And that's in part because it's a really big box that's effectively had taken what were two
I
small.
don't remember how much it was.
It was it's like $109 pre-order and like 175 MSRP. But it's
It's a
also
big one.
it's actually bigger than the Europe because of the campaign stuff.
Yeah.
But to answer your specific question about scenarios, so what that means is just like with the big now combined Europe box, which comes with 24 maps and 24 scenarios, Vietnam also comes with 24 maps and 24 scenarios. And when we were selecting these scenarios, we had to select ones that will produce good maps for the RSG. And what that meant was like, so in other words, we want representative terrain rather than highly specific terrain that's instantly recognizable. So there's no, for instance, in the base game box, Way scenario, like Way Citadel, because everyone's going to know what the Way Citadel is. And you don't want to have like a random scenario there, given most of the fighting that happened there occurred within a very confined period in 1968. That being said, I will just quickly, before continuing, say that the first battle pack is going to be Tet. So that's where you're going to see these more specialized maps. But we picked 24 scenarios based off of giving us those representative maps. So just since we're talking with like some marine examples, is that you're going to have Nam Yen 3, which is part of Operation Starlight, is a marine versus NLF scenario. And then there's going to be a scenario from Operation Dewey Canyon in 1969. There's actually Long Tan, which Mitch mentioned earlier, is at least a slice of Long Tan is included. I'm trying to think of some of the others. There's, like I said, the scenarios based off of Skyline Ridge, which is a famous engagement in the Laotian Civil War. Yeah, just a lot of different scenarios, and those have all been already set actually, and the vast majority of them are already been written. So if you have questions about any others, I can pull up the list. But there is a lot of scenarios in the base game box if you want to start there and rather than jumping right into the RSG.
What are some of the battles that you guys say it holds a special place with me as far as interest that you just had to put in there, and maybe the other guy disagreed?
I think that we were balancing so many different variables that I don't know if we were able to make calls like that too much.
Yeah. I
Because
think like overall, like the sort of setup for us is that we should be able to do any, and it really wasn't a matter of like if it's not in the base box, it's worth doing, then it's something that we can be done through a battle pack. But like sort of what Stephen was saying, for the base box, the thing that we wanted to cover was all of the territorial regions and all of the factions for all of the years. So that the RSG could generate for any year, any faction, a reasonable engagement that would be at the level of CC across the board. So no matter where it would be in the area, and so being able to do that really means that if we need to pull up and build out any scenario, it's the base is there. That's the beauty of the RSG. It's like the base is there to say, okay, it's going to be in this area. We can utilize either these maps or we do a new map based off of that, which it just extends what the RSG can do. And so the battle packs are really going to allow for all of the richness that people want in terms of like very specific battles or very specific campaigns that folk will want to see play out.
So like a good example of some of these things that we had to balance for the RSG, which is why we had to pick these more representative scenarios rather than letting like fame or personal excitement guide them, is that when MB is saying these regions, the maps actually and the RSG actually change the pool of maps you draw from based off of 6 regions in the game. So Laos and Cambodia, but then all 4 of the core zones, which are these military regions that the US and South Vietnamese use to separate the fight, had pretty varied geography and also population density. And so there are, for instance, 2 Laos maps, 2 Cambodia maps, 4 maps for Fourth Corps, 4 maps for Second Corps, which is like the Central Highlands, and then 6 maps for the Third Corps, which is the area around Saigon, and 6 maps for First Corps, which is that area by the DMZ where the Marines were, for instance. And the other thing we're balancing with the maps is that there are 12 populated maps and like 12 remote maps. And this is marked on the map themselves because in remote areas, you don't have to worry about your firepower. Whereas in populated areas, the map can either be designated a free fire zone or a restricted fire zone. And that will actually make it harder for the Free World Forces factions to use their fire support, but it'll also make it more expensive for communist factions to actually buy fortifications or support table uh, costs, because essentially free fire zones in Vietnam largely overlapped with where insurgent controlled areas were. And so we're trying to build in some of these other variables into how the RSG works, but that meant we had to pick maps that have a nice distributional spread of those variables.
So the free world allies, I'm just going to take some guesses here. Australia, South Korea.
Yeah.
Am I missing
And
any?
Thailand.
Thailand. Yep. And you said the game goes to 75. So do you have Khmer Rouge? I know that's a little
Yes.
later, but
yeah. So the NLF. So if you remember from Europe, there's like Axis and Minor Axis Allies deck, which is Italians and Minor Axis Allies deck, French and Minor Allies deck. Where and GMT is actually releasing these counters to actually reflect some of those minor factions. But in ours, for instance, the Khmer Rouge or Pathet Lao, which are the communist insurgencies in Cambodia and Laos, respectively, they use the NLF deck. So it's NLF and minor insurgent allies. Whereas for instance, there's just a free world allied deck, which then includes the South Korean troops, the Thai troops, and the Australians, with that change for the Australians with the deck shift.
Yeah, which, if you haven't played the game, the OOBs in the game is, and how you can kind of, how your forces look and present on the battlefield, to me is like a hidden gem of the game, that it keeps the historiosity of the game going very well, and it limits the player. Like you said earlier, well, I have 2 green, 2 average, and 2 elite, right? Because that's what a normal order of battle would have borne for certain units. So looking at, there were some interesting things about Vietnam that obviously were not in World War II. How do you do things such as, I kind of know the answer already, air mobile, riverine type fights?
So this is the question of the month, so to speak, which is the number one question we've gotten so far is, where are my helicopters? Because it could not possibly be a Vietnam game without helicopters. We stick to the core Chad principle, not the Great War heresy that
Whoa,
you do not.
whoa.
Yeah, that you do not include vehicles given the scale in Combat Commander. Now, in Great War, there's some sense, given the interaction between tanks and infantry and the fact they say the scale is higher, for why there's tanks. So that was more of a joke than anything. But in Vietnam, since we've kept the Europe scale of squads and teams, the big problem with something like helicopters or riverine is they're going to drop you off, and then you're, in vast majority of the cases, you're going to walk further and then get into contact, which means there's, besides the calling in of helicopter gunships, there's not a ton of reason for them to be there. That, in other words, like, you could have a game like Fighting Formations is a game by Chad that shows the interactions on a higher scale between armor in World War II and infantry on the Eastern Front and now on the Western Front with the 29th. But the smaller scale of CC is just not that good for vehicles. That being said, we've included, so if as Mitch will of course remember, but if for any listener, in Pacific, there are these special postures called Invader and Bonsai to represent these kind of different modes of setting up the map and with some special rules. And we have an air assault posture. And what the air assault posture does is it means that your platoons have to come in kind of in bundles. So one comes in at the beginning of the game, and then next turn another one will come in, and then another one on the edge of your map in non-covered terrain. And you also get to make free gunship rolls to model basically hot LZs. Because if the one situation where you are going to have a combat commander engagement around helicopters, and there's actually also a riverine scenario. So the mobile riverine force has their own scenario with an amphibious assault. You are going to get this as basically hot landings. You need to have some rules about the vehicles and the fire support they cover, and this kind of staggered deployment. But outside of that, the answer is generally some vehicle deploys you somewhere, and then you walk into an engagement, and so you don't really need the vehicles.
Yeah, it's kind of like in miniatures gaming. I know more heresy, right? Everybody wants to play 82nd, 101st. Well, you're playing them because movies and books that you probably didn't read, but a lot of it's how they got into battle. It wasn't what they were about. So bravo, gentlemen, you've passed that test. because people complain about that all the time with the game, and I'm like, you really are not understanding the focus that the designer had with this game. And if you want to play vehicles, it's fine. I mean, not to trash a miniatures game, Flames of War, but I remember when I first saw proofreading Flames of War Nam, which you're not allowed to call it unless you were there, that these massive tank battles that took place in Vietnam, and people just ate it up. And it's sometimes I think people out there have to understand, when you see a movie, the director has an intent of how he wants you to view the movie and how he wants you to feel. War games are the same damn way. Not trying to say you guys are pampered artists or Martin Scorsese or something, but like there's an experience that these two guys wanted you to have, and despite all your kicking and complaining, you're going to have that damn experience. I'm
It's
sorry. I
interesting
know
because
you guys want to sell games, but go ahead. Sorry. Go
no,
ahead.
no, I was gonna say it's interesting because like one of the balances that we had to do as we were doing the build is that we knew that what the expectation for Combat Commander is. If you like do a search or read reviews, everybody will talk about how cinematic it feels. And that really is a representation of like from the media what the perceptions of what these wars are. People still want that and they want to feel that coming out of the CC system. And we didn't
Right.
want to take that away from them by providing the levels of realism that we did, but we feel like we had to be able to do both. Is there a way that you can do both? And I think like when you open up the box, you can go and you can play any engagement just like you did with an NECC. If you are a CC fan, there's no doubt that you've just played open up and say, hey, let's just play this scenario and have this wonderful cinematic experience. But I think this is one of the reasons that we wanted to also do the campaign is that because through the campaign, what you're able to do is place and contextualize that cinematic single engagement to what it actually meant for a whole battalion to be there in Vietnam for an operation. What does that actually mean? What does this engagement mean in the course of this bigger operation? And being able to understand that is really where you were talking a little bit earlier. Like games are a place that you can have some learnings and you can sort of come to realize things about a war through these experiences. And we didn't want to. That's sort of where I think both of us sort of come into the design from the design perspective. But at the same time, we definitely didn't want to take away that from the core CC fans who are looking for that cinematic experience.
Wow. I'll tell you what, that answer was very passionate, sir. I appreciate it.
I'm a fan as well. I think that's the other side of it. Like we're both fans. It's not necessarily, we're not fans of everything. Don't get me wrong, but we are fans. We are war game fans, and we love playing these games.
And you love Chad Jensen's series.
Yeah, for real. Like we love Chad for all of it. I mean, there's the big joke is that literally, the only reason that I got Steven to agree to do CC is because we wanted to do fighting formations, and so like, this is one of our big inspirations just in terms of how we think about it, and so like, we want to like respect it, like put pure respect into what we're building.
What did you learn about Chad Jensen's process and how he builds mechanics that you didn't know before you started this project?
So I got first kind of a very clear glimpse into this when I was going through the decks recently. So the answer, which MB actually like highlighted to this a little bit earlier, is that I think Chad does a really great job of um, kind of showing rather than telling. There's kind of that phrase about movies where um, I can I don't have to like expound to you about all the research I did or include like here's a detailed table with like 18 modifiers, but he can include these differences and almost organically to the point where the player will just discover them, or even if they don't discover them, they kind of understand the feel of them. And if you look at, and you can go for any of the people who own it after this, if you listen to this podcast, if you have a copy of Mediterranean, you can go to the Mediterranean playbook and see the distribution of not just orders, but also actions and events across the 6 Europe decks. And what you'll see is that there's a massive level of intention in the distribution of even just the random events that occur across the different decks. And that meant that like to replicate that in a way that was both feels like smart from a CC perspective, but also still captures the differences of Vietnam with new actions and events. Like I would do things and then I would text or message our developer Joe and be like, "Oh, I did something smart that Chad hasn't done," and then I would look a little bit closer and figure out, no, Chad has done that already too. So it was very hard, yeah, to come up with something that I feel like Chad hadn't already thought of in a really smart way.
Well, I don't want to seem like, this is a Chad Jensen love fest, but it should be. If you would
Absolutely should
ask
be.
me, what was that?
I said it absolutely should be.
It should be. Is he is a master of abstraction by taking very, very difficult things and breaking it down to the player while still producing a balanced, even game that will not insult your intelligence.
Mhm.
I mean,
Exactly.
it it's so hard to do, and I wish more designers like they tend to go big or go home, where it has to be more realistic, not realizing that, the average person that plays the game, they don't want to go to Vietnam. Um, I had an uncle that didn't want to go, and he still lives in Canada. So that's a joke, really. They're already Canadian. Um, but I think that was his genius of taking those those core things that was important to him and putting it in the game to a point where, okay, I don't want the lesson, but you get the experience. And I
Mhm.
noticed that, I think, when my Mediterranean box came, just like Steve said, and I read through the cards. I love playing the Commonwealth and British and everything because I hate America sometimes. No, I mean, because there's no learning curve for me, right? You know,
Yeah.
but the British, stubborn on defense, right? The set piece battle. These were core British doctrinal things, and the flavor is in the cards.
Yep. Yep.
You can't say he got it wrong. The flavor's 100% in the cards.
And it takes, I think the thing that's hard for new players to grasp, especially if you're coming from another like idea of what this gaming experience is going to be, is that it really takes going through your deck multiple times to realize, oh, this is how this deck works. And it's one of those core like deck buildery type of feels, which that's another CC joke if anybody knows. But understanding your deck is really core to understanding what you're capable of. And I've been on the CC ladder and I've played with players 200 times better than me. And the two different things that they do that a new player will probably not realize until they've gotten deeper into the system is they understand how to set up their forces, because I think that's one of the harder things for anybody across any games is when you have open setup, knowing what's the right place to position and how to build your formations is a challenge. But then also understanding how that pairs with what you've got in your hand or what you can bring into your hand from your deck. And that's when you start getting good, because the good players are good. They know those decks, they know how to set themselves up, and they
Yep.
know how to build those momentum to get the things that they need to get done. And so I'm always, whenever somebody's like, oh, it's just too random, I'm like, just watch a real player play, and you'll see that they have perfect, not perfect control, but they know how to control the randomness in a way to be effective. And that's really the lesson: is how are you going to be effective in these situations?
Yeah, that's spot on. That the first time I really immersed myself in the game was at the Combat Commander Con, which just passed. And I recommend anybody that's in the area. It's great guys playing the games, and they want you to love the game as much as they do.
Hmm.
So it's there's no assholiness, which is a word I made up, and you can't use it. But they want you to learn how to play it. And I remember this one guy I played. He was from Long Island. I think his name was Larry. Is if you set up like that, you're going to lose the game. And what are you laughing? Because he said it
It's
like
true.
that.
It's
It's
true.
true. It's true. And he could have just like clubbed a baby seal. I would even have made the noise, but like that is true to the game, and people are like, no, that's bullshit. I'm like, play the game a few times against experienced players.
Hmm.
The other thing that I think people need to realize about this system is that you know how many guys play games by themselves. I
Yeah.
I don't. I play with myself enough as it is. So I mean games it is. That it has a community behind it, a very
Yeah.
loyal
Yeah.
and a very friendly community.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
So
the CC community is absolutely the best. And I think one of the best things is like it's a competitive game, and like I said, the ones that are really good, they will tear you to shreds, but they will do it to teach you. And they will show you like, okay, this is how, and everybody is sort of welcoming you and like allowing you to get that feel for what it means. So that, because they want more players, and it's just a great community.
they know how to grow that game. One of the most interesting things that I thought was here I am with my little baggies, right? And
Hmm.
the guy's like, no, you want to go down to, the container store and get this, this, and this. And this is how you arrange it because it speeds you up. And I'm like, yeah, he was right. The other one, so that I did. The one I didn't is to get a large picture frame and put the map in
For
the
the
picture
frames.
frame.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I'm planning on doing that. It also gets the damn thing to lay flat. It's I mean, it's kind of like this. I've been to and covered ASL tournaments. It's
Mhm.
ASL without the cultiness.
Yeah, it's definitely a welcoming thing. The thing that's crazy is that, like, or not even crazy, but it makes a lot of sense, is that Chad was like a really hardcore ASL player.
That's what I heard.
Um, and that's sort of what drove it. Like, the reason that CC is so good is because Chad plays so much ASL, Um, take
But
it that however you will.
but have you guys ever been to an ASL event,
I
No,
have not been to an ASL event, no.
Steve?
no, absolutely not.
Okay. Steve, I'll tell you what, if you went to one, you'd be the youngest, most buff guy there.
Oh, Jesus.
And I went to Winter Offensive to cover it, and great guys at MMP that run that, and they're true believers. But it's like, what about modernizing the game? The counters are kind of the maps, like, I know what they look like in my sleep. And it's like, but our fans like it. And I made the comment, and this is, yeah, maybe I was the dick. I go, the only thing I can tell you about this group of guys, including myself, is in 20 years from now, none of us are going to be here. And about getting new players in the game. So they didn't like that, but, speak my mind. Uh, as far as the basic artwork of the game, with Great War Commander, Heresy, that they did change the artwork. They did change the aesthetic feel. Are you guys thinking of that? Because I know
Um,
it's far too early to talk about principal artwork.
yeah. I think, well, the one thing that's like great that we have is we have Kai to
Kai,
work with, and
yeah.
so Kai is doing all of the maps and will likely be doing all of the counters as well. But as we've been in discussion about it, we aren't going to do it just a direct port of the CCE sort of art. There is going to be something that like gives it the proper feel for Vietnam. What that evolves to is still TBD, I would say, but it's
Come
going to
on.
both respect the core aesthetic that sort of Chad laid down, which is clarity of purpose. You know, I think all his maps are also, oh my gosh, you were talking before about like what you realize. I've been doing all the maps for our prototype maps, and the map work that Chad did for all of them, like there's just so many little details that you can't even appreciate. Like you start to appreciate them definitely as you're playing them, but as I've started going and saying having a design, like Stephen will tell you, my maps look an absolute mess. And it's one of those where I realize, you know, I can only get but so far, particularly in the time frame that I have, to be able to convey the level of like detail that was happening on the maps for Chad. And he did it in a very sort of clean and clear fashion. And so Kai really like understands that and really like embodies that today to be able to say, take whatever trash that I to throw at her and say, hey, this is the map that I've been thinking about. This is what we've been playing on. Can we get this into the CC style? And I think that's one of the things that we definitely want to adhere to. But again, we will do stuff to make it sort of give it that Vietnam feeling as we get the whole package together.
The Vietnam feeling. So dropping acid.
That'll be at the bottom of the box under the
Mhm.
you know, the little insert that GMT always has.
Just tell them to lick the counters, man. I mean, it's okay. Um, we talked a lot about movies. Movies quickly shape our culture, sometimes to our detriment. But we mentioned a bunch of movies, but some of them are better than others. What is one of your favorites, and what scene makes it your favorite? And why is it
movie?
Apocalypse Now?
That's a good question. So, I have two answers. One that is not a helpful answer for the viewer, and one is kind of a cliche answer.
We don't
The
have
unhelpful.
viewers.
Okay.
We're
Okay. So
podcasts are for the blind.
you say for the one listener that Mitch said exists.
Yeah.
Um, there's a novel, a Korean novel, which is probably the only source in English that's readily acquirable. From the Korean perspective, is called White Badge, and it was actually made into a movie in Korea in the 90s, and you can find it for free online. And it does a pretty good job of showing from the soldiers' perspective, especially the Korean soldiers' perspective, which their derogatory term for them were mercenaries because their government was essentially getting foreign military aid for them to serve there, about how it seemed to be fairly pointless to them.
Hmm.
And then that's a hard to acquire movie. So if you can track it down, but my of course as someone who studies civilian victimization is that I don't mind the village scene in Platoon
Mm.
because I've seen the photo of the Americal officer who's got his 45 caliber right up against the villager's head, that scene is actually based on. It's a
Mm.
pretty prominent photo, even though I don't think it's not anything like Ken Burns, but we have very well documented the photo that inspired that.
Yeah. I mean, as he was there, Oliver Stone, but it's just like Oliver Stone. He just has to add some stuff.
Hmm.
And when you guys watch any Korean War movie, the term "over the top" will come to your mind because I mean, the one about the two brothers during the Korean War, over the top, man, one of my faves. But not the
Mm.
over the top with Sylvester Stallone when he was doing the. Remember the arm wrestling?
I do remember that.
And he didn't win the Academy Award. I want to see him do Shakespeare next. All right, MB, which one is yours?
See, I was thinking about it, and I think this is just like the one that's recently in mind, which is that new series that's on Apple. Which I'm not going to say whether or not it's good or not, but there's just the scene. A big part of it is veterans reconnecting, and there's a couple of scenes where it's just like there's one where it's this rescue pilot and the soldier that he rescued, and they reconnect after 50 years, and it just really captures, like you were saying at the top, just like how much it's still culturally a part of us. I was just at a fair around here with my kids, and the VFA was there, and I just sat and talked to them a little bit, and just like hearing those stories from like how it still like resonates, and we're not going to have those stories for much longer, I think, is the thing. Like
Yeah.
that generation is getting up there, so like being able to see those moments and like really feel the humanity of those folk that actually experienced it, I think is really comes across in a couple of the scenes. There's some other stuff that's like Apple over the top as well, but it's the
What's it called?
those what is it called?
Because they're big sponsors of ours. They host our podcast for free.
I can't remember the name. What's it called, Steve? Do you remember the name of it?
I have to look it up. Now, to be clear to the listener, this is a documentary, if that wasn't already
Yes.
clear. Not
It
a
is a
movie.
documentary.
Yeah.
It sounds like.
Vietnam, the war that changed America.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
it's 5 or
very
6
true.
parts.
Yeah, but it's got some just like great one, like we were talking about it. It's got some great footage that most likely came from a collection or something like that. But so it's some new footage that you haven't seen before, and then a big sort of arcing thing is just like the reconnecting of people from this footage, which is just like, again, it's a great picture into that impacts of the war at that level.
There's a documentary that won an Academy Award for Best Documentary many years ago called The Last Days of Vietnam.
Hmm.
And have you guys seen it?
I think it's Last Days of Saigon, right? It's about
Saigon,
the
right?
yeah.
Yeah.
It's what
Yeah.
the 20th anniversary is about to be here in a little bit.
It is, yeah.
Sorry,
It's
the 50th anniversary.
yeah, of April. And I didn't want to talk about that, but they keep interviewing that guy that was waiting to get on a helicopter that finally got on one. And then he talks about when he came to America, what he did for 20 years. And he was a Marine Corps helicopter pilot. And it's when you look at sometimes it takes people from the outside to define what America means, and I think that gets it right away. And they had so many first person accounts that I really liked it. But I'm gonna go with my movie, and it's the Do Long Bridge scene in Apocalypse Now with the roach. You know, the guy with the blooper. You need a flare, man? Nah, man, he's real close. He's real close. Because I know guys like that, and they still scare the hell out of me. But yeah. I mean, it's I'm really excited for this game. Not because you two guys are doing it, because I know it's going to be great, but because I'm a huge fan of the series. That, and okay, I'm going to show my age here. I remember it was before either of you guys were born. In 75, 50 years ago, watching them push helicopters over the side of Navy ships. And I was thinking to myself, why are they doing that? Won't they need them later? And I don't think I understood until much later in life the human tragedy that was going on as well. And really kind of what America was like in 1975. And, when I first came in the military, I didn't need to read a book on linebacker. I knew guys that flew, and and as we go forward, just like with World War II, and lose that connection, it's games are a good way to help us remember, especially well done games. I know this one's going to be like that as well. Enough ass kissing. Let's get on to the they're waiting for me to ask the crazy question, so I'm not. But if you guys have a couple, there's a few random things I want to talk about, but before I do that, I'm going to say this at the end of the show again. Go to GMT Games, Combat Commander Vietnam, P500 back it. They said that hopefully we'll get it before I expire. Now, since everybody sort of knows my age, but so let's talk about the industry a little bit. We'll date this podcast. The tariffs. I don't know if you saw that one of the game companies is suing the president. Good luck with that. Never fun to sue the government. What do you think it's going to be like for the next however long with what is going on, and what are you kind of doing to soften, lessen the blow? I mean, it's like this Vietnam game doesn't have to go to print so fast. Like, what do you think if you could predict the future?
We were actually just talking about this, and I don't
That's
think
all
that
we
we
used to
can.
talk about.
I don't think we can predict the future. It's really one of those where the industry is gonna. I mean, this is the second time. This will be the second time that the industry sort of has to take this big hard hit, where at sort of like at its peak, right? Like,
Yeah.
And unfortunately, like it's already the repercussions are already there. So it's really a matter of like how stable things will be 6 months from now, a year from now. Who knows? Like what the aftermath of that'll be. I don't think games are going to go away, but definitely the plethora of games that we've been sort of blessed with over these last few, I mean, almost like a decade of just steady pumping out of games is going to slow down a lot. What I hope, and I think Mitch, you may agree with this, is that means we'll get fewer but better games. And I think that's where my contribution overall is, like hoping that whatever it is that I can get through these turbulence is going to be worth it at the level of quality that I can push.
Yeah, I was talking with my game designers today. We're talking about like, hey, he just moved. You need to come over and play. And I said, yeah, I got a lot of cardboard to punch and get to the table. And he goes, yeah, because we won't be getting new games for quite some time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
That would require companies in their production pipeline to make choices based on criteria that may not exist currently.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yep.
we flood the market because there's a market for it that, I mean, I agree with you, but boy, that's a lot of hope, my friend.
Mhm.
I
Yeah,
mean,
there's a lot of hope.
you see the hope in there because
I'm the optimistic one. Steven's the realist.
oh, I'm a pessimist. So
Yeah.
that's why we all
There we
get
go. We're all
along.
balanced. Yeah, that all balances out.
Yeah. Steve, what do you think?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say is the pessimist, or as the realist, and be nicely put it, is that the truth of the matter is that the board game industry could completely go away, and we would still have more games than we ever had time to play. And
Yeah.
so, if this like, I do think that like the games that I increasingly want to design, and I would still say that this applies to the first couple of games I designed, is that I really want to, if I can, given the bad news, design games that I want people to actually play and to devote serious time to.
Mm-hmm.
Which means as a designer, you have to give them a reason to devote time to it. And I think that's something that Chad was very good at doing. But I don't own a lot of games now. And I think that even though it's not smart as someone to say from an industry perspective, I do think that somewhat of a pause forced upon us, since I don't think we'd want to pause otherwise, will hopefully convince people to like realize that you just don't have time to play these massive collections you've accumulated, and to think a little bit more seriously about what they do enjoy. And that can be very different than what I enjoy. But I look forward to definitely actually playing some of the games, more of the games I have, and not just endlessly acquiring, even though I'm pretty good about that now, given I only have about 10 war games.
Wow. I was going to donate a bunch to you, but yeah, every time I get a cough, Sebastian's like, you will leave your collection to Goose. And I wish I could take you into our new building, but Peter Perla, who wrote the book about wargaming a few years ago, and he passed. We inherited his
You got the
collection.
collection? Nice.
We got the collection. I got to tell you, man owned more games of Risk than I thought they produced. Like, I got to be honest. Oh, I've only played it once. Didn't care for it. Right. Because somebody else will take one half of Australia, and the game's over for me for the most part. I mean, come on, right? And then how many? Saying the Ukraine is weak. It's old. It's played. It's stale, right? So yeah, I mean, that's one hell of a collection. But what I did notice, and in his definite memory, he was a busy guy. He designed some games, but I noticed a lot of them weren't open.
Hmm.
And it kind of
Hmm.
made me think, like, well, I guess I got to suffer on with life till all my cardboard gets punched.
Mhm.
That's why play miniatures, guys. You never have that problem.
No
But you
punching
have to
cardboard.
paint them. You gotta paint the silly things.
Yeah,
How
you
much time
find
does
some
that
idiot
take?
to paint it for you, huh?
Okay, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it's a different type of excitement, but yeah, I think you guys kind of stated that really well. It's funny we did not coordinate on these answers, but I, NB. I got to be honest. I really think that they're going to look at what is a good game and what isn't, and not take a risk, because we know that this industry is extremely risk adverse.
Already, yeah.
I mean, already, but they have to be. I mean, it's
Yep.
still a niche, and it's not like we're dealing with Wizards of the Coast or Games Workshop, where, I mean, them Asmodee. I mean, that's like $4 or $5 billion of company there.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. I'd love to
Yeah.
have that. I don't know what I'd do with it. You know what I would do with it? Start a game company. Yeah, it's because sometimes I don't make any sense, but I I I think that more folks are going to play games. I think that when this opens up again, that I think we need to relook at our community and really kind of focus on where the younger gamers coming from, because it's hard to get them into cardboard lately. Just it's the scale, but like I've sat people down that play fantasy type games, and you sit down with them, and they pick up war games very easily, just that the genre is changed. You know, like a commander could be a spellcaster.
Right.
Yeah, it's all good stuff. But you know, once again, of course, we're gonna pop off this and then talk about you, the guy that listens to this. But I really want to thank you guys for coming on. I'm sorry I missed you at Circle DC, and we're gonna have to meet up at some game store wearing trench coats sometime to play. But I still want to thank you guys. I really want to get you guys back, and we just talk about game design.
Oh yeah.
But this is this is promotional. But look, if I see you doing a video thing too, I'm gonna be like, okay, that's it. I was the small market podcast, but
Yeah, there's already
I
pressure. There's already
This-
pressure for us to do a video,
I'm,
and
I'm really pissed off about what's happening in that regard.
I might be able to get out of it. I'm trying to get out of it
who
because
are you doing the
we
video
really,
with?
of course, Fred. Thank God
Yeah.
no one actually listens to this because
Yeah.
it's gonna be on live me complaining about having to do this thing. Yeah. Um, I primarily want to go on places where I can talk about Hmong tribesmen without people rolling their eyes, and I think I can do that here, and I don't think that I can do that pretty much anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm happy that the game has the Hmong tribesmen, because that's an interesting story. And if you do French Indochina, you
Mhm.
had a lot of different ethnic groups fighting in that war. And they had some pretty interesting reasons of why.
Mm.
And Steve knows this already from another project I had him look at. Is I'm more fascinated with the shaping of the U.S. involvement in Vietnam, which would be the post-war into the French, because, I mean, how the French could screw that up so quickly, and they did, but it could be worse. They could have been colonized by Belgians.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Yeah, that's an inside joke that, I'm not popular in Belgium. It's just the way it is. They just don't like that I make fun of them too much. But I'm going to thank you guys so much, man. Once again, I have you guys sign off with a couple of words, but I'm going to turn it to you guys for any last words.
I mean, I think the thing that I'd say is if you
Keep on
haven't
trucking.
played Chad Jensen, play some Chad Jensen, and then go pick up Combat Commander Vietnam.
Right.
Yeah, I'll just add that if you want to know more about the tariff situation than our very avoidant answers, because I don't want to get sent to an El Salvador prison, you should go read Gene's newsletter because
Fantastic.
it's fantastic. Like it's probably even some of the best analysis I've seen in general from an inside company view of how the tariffs actually affect how a small company like GMT is going to operate, and like the immediate effects, the long-term effects. And I don't know if it's still going on, but the basically the bottom line of what Gene needs right now is massive cash reserves to pay this huge amount of money for these games that they have like in transit, where they're going to have to pay this big tariff on them. And so they're doing this sale right now where it's like 20% off or whatever, 25% off for GMT loyalty customers, just to help them build up their cash reserves. I don't remember whether it applies, but you should go either get some Combat Commander Europe stuff or go get Fighting Formations, another Chad Jensen design, just to help out GMT and to also prove to them that this kind of stuff is what the customer base is interested in, and that will help NB and I in the long run do more stuff with GMT along these lines.
Hey, I looked at it, and I think I've never played Fighting Formations, but yeah, I think I'm going to pick that up today. Damn you guys!
You've
I
played
thought I'd get
OWS
out of
though.
this. What?
You've played OWS though.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
That's another
we just sent a copy down to Guantanamo, and boy, people are singing like a bird with that game. It is. You played it, right?
I have. I've done a few turns. Yeah.
Yeah. It is. God bless you, man. Like
It was at Circle DC.
Yeah, they were there.
Yeah,
They were
yeah.
definitely
Tim
there.
was up there. Yeah,
Yeah.
and because I saw Tim twice last week, and how was Circle DC? Yeah, it was all right. Oh, come on, man. Look, you torture people with your damn game, right? So no, I'm only kidding.
But seriously, pick up Fighting Formations and play it, and then let's talk again for sure.
All right, which one do I need to pick up? There's more than one, right?
I don't know if the base GD is available anymore.
Yeah,
Just
there's an East
the
Front
expansion.
one that you might have to buy like a used copy of. I don't think it'll be too much money. Yeah, that's German versus Soviets, World War II, which is good. But they just came out with the 29th American Normandy Bokages versus Germans, and I don't. There's very few rules changes across them. It's just basically experiencing the U.S. So I think you could easily buy that one and be just as happy.
It's all about being happy.
There it is.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to turn it back to Sean in the studio. I want to have you guys on again. And thank you guys for coming on, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks so much for joining the show tonight. Remember to follow us on Twitter at No Dice, No Glory, and keep the conversation going on NoDiceNoGlory.com, now featuring our own message boards. Have a great night, everybody.